What's up, everybody? Thralls here once again. I'm Necrotic Nick, and I have yet another album review for you. So another one that I wanted to go over for the week of the 17th of February was the latest offering from international death metal group, or rather supergroup, Siege of Power, with their new album, This Is Tomorrow. Again, this comes out on the 17th of February on Metal Blade Records. This band formed in 2017 in both the US and the Netherlands, because this features current and former members of bands like Autopsy, Hail of Bullets, Thanatos, and even Asphyx. This is their second album overall. I picked up their debut, actually when it came out, kind of on a whim, just because I saw who was in it. Warning Blast. It was a pretty decent album. A lot of short, kind of punky death metal / thrash metal songs. It was alright, but I saw this one was coming out and I noticed that the songs were a little bit longer, a little bit different, and I figured, alright, well, maybe they're changing around their sound a little bit, and I would just kind of check it out again, because again, this is comprised of bands I love, so of course I'm definitely interested in checking it out. And while I would say this is kind of similar to the first one, it's also very different in some respects. The songs in here are a little bit longer overall, but the album is like a full 6 minutes shorter, and it pretty much has all the hallmarks of all the bands involved. Like, you have Chris Reifert on vocals, and pretty much anytime he's on vocals, I'm interested because he has one of the best death metal deliveries out there. One of the best metal deliveries. Like, he is so dramatic and over the top. It's like a fucking recital of gore and violence every time he fucking steps in front of the mic. And it kicks off in pretty furious fashion with the opening track, Force Fed Fear, pretty much getting right into death metal and thrash metal riffs. It's, bombastic, it's just explosive. There's a nice groovy bridge to it. You got a good mix of punky riffs and Slayer riffs, which, believe me, those will pop up on here quite a bit. And when it comes down to the faster songs on here, they are mostly along the lines of thrash metal and I would say like kind of crusty D beats, like especially like, songs like The Devil's Grasp and No Salvation. Those even go further more into like crust punk territory, or like maybe mixing that with a little bit of like Motorhead and Celtic Frost. The riffs are definitely more punk adjacent, like they kind of have like a hardcore bounce to them, but there's also a layer of like death metal filth all over them. And production wise, they gave the guitars a nice gritty sound. They are very thick and ugly, and the bass on here absolutely fucking snarls. Like, the low end absolutely fucking rumbles on this. Now, as I said, a lot of this is very meat potatoes. It's very stripped down. It is built on riffs and energy and some incredible fucking vocals, of course. And that is kind of like both good and bad. When it's good, they are playing like, the best shit from a ton of bands that have influenced them. Of course, like namely Slayer, it's a Celtic Frost, and then even going into stuff that is a little bit more familiar to the members that are in this. Like namely some like Death Doom moments on here. The title track and As the World Crumbles are particularly doomy and bleak. The riffs are fucking just disgusting. They're a little bit more dissonant. They are steeped with all the gloom and doom in the world, especially on the title track on here. Contrary to Annie's overly positive orphan logic, the sun will not come out tomorrow, not on this song. This is dark and just dismal sounding. There's big chuggy riffs that sort of drive the verses, but it opens up with this just absolutely bleak, disgusting melody that would feel completely at home on an album by Hooded Menace, or even going as far as like Funeral Doom, like a band like Ahab or fucking Esoteric. And as if it needed to solidify how bleak it was, the end of it is just single droning notes. It slows it down to just like, pretty much floor toms, snare, like it's just sort of a slow march while fucking Chris just tells you about how the sun will not come out tomorrow. You're all fucked. This is the end of the world, and it's happening tomorrow. But As the World Crumbles is also really good in that, and it does something a little bit different with using clean tones on it. There are like clean single tones while you get more isolated vocals from Chris, which of course he is fucking hamming it up to make it his, most dramatic delivery yet, which, all of his deliveries are his most dramatic delivery yet, at least in my opinion. While this one also feels dark and oppressive, the cleaner tone on there kind of gives it this very just kind of, empty, just dark feeling to it. It does have some cool, like, more epic moments where it kind of rises out from the fucking dirt or the trenches or wherever the fuck it is, but it makes sure to bring you right the fuck back down. And this song actually has a pretty killer solo on it too, which solos are kind of rare on here. Like, you get a lot of squealy dive bombs, like that's to be expected in death metal, but solos themselves, you only get like a couple, but there are a lot of cool, like I would say harmonies on here to kind of make it either more epic or more doomy or maybe a little bit more energetic at times. Throughout most of this, I would say this is pretty much a combination of like the two main bands you would associate with this, namely Asphyx and Autopsy. Like you have the more jagged, more punky transitions that you would associate with Autopsy and the giant death doom breaks, but you have maybe some more melodic sensibilities that would be more accustomed to like Asphyx or even Hail of Bullets. I wouldn't say Autopsy is ever known for being epic, but they're definitely known for being fucking doomy and heavy and just ridiculous. It has all of that, but it's a little bit more restrained for the sake of like maybe a hook or two on here. A song like Zero Containment is a pretty good example of this. It is explosive. It's thrashy. It's probably the most explosive, high energy song on here. And again, it kind of plays to both the strengths of Autopsy and Asphyx and Hail of Bullets and kind of all the bands, honestly. But you have this, again, like abruptness, this just explosive energy. It's immediately in your face, but you also have some really clever riffs and melodies in there as well. And while the melodies are catchy, they're also very sinister. You have like some death metal tremolos that pop up in there that are more akin to like Possessed. I would even again say Slayer, but it has a more death metal vibe to it. And Sinister Christian's sort of flip-flopping between like groovy death doom breaks and like more like D-beat Motorhead worship. Again, it's kind of all the elements of these bands sort of kind of coming together and, well, not necessarily like doing anything new or anything that surprising, but doing something that you would associate with them very well. There weren't a lot of surprises on here in terms of what I was expecting, outside of a couple of tracks on here, namely Oblivion and Deeper Wounds, because there are some slight black metal tinges, especially on Deeper Wounds. The song is more mid-tempo, but it's the riffs that are very different. They're more cold, there's a little bit more distance, there's this sort of melodic tremolo. Like it's kind of like a more mid-tempo Dissection or Immortal song, maybe even like Hypocrisy, because there is a fair amount of melody to it, but it's a really interesting song just because atmosphere-wise, it's very different from, I would say, a good chunk of these songs. I like how it mixes up the more blackened riffs with like some straight-up chuggy riffs and a giant death doom breakdown. And I thought this was kind of a cool touch. Like I really wasn't expecting it. It does add some atmosphere and a little bit of depth to their sound, which, in terms of depth on here, this overall is just kind of meat and potatoes. And again, I said both good and bad. When it's good, it's pretty fucking solid. But when it's bad, it's not necessarily bad, but it's kind of bland. I brought up Oblivion for having some blackened moments, but honestly, that was the only stuff on it I really liked. Like outside of that, it was just sort of a basic sort of D-beat thrash song. Like it was just okay. But I would say the main offender is probably Scavengers in terms of just being very basic. This song is maybe two riffs. It's a mid-tempo affair. It's kind of got a basic chuggy riff, kind of basic vocal pattern. It kind of sounds like Bolt Thrower, except maybe the B in Bolt Thrower stands for basic, so it's Basic Thrower. It's just sort of a there track, and it's like the third track on here, and you're kind of just settling into this album, and it just sounds like there should have been more to it. Like there's really not much to it, and it's just like a quick like 3-minute track, maybe 3.5 minutes, and it's just kind of there, taking up space in the album. And Ghosts of Humanity, while I think tried to do some different stuff, like namely this is where you hear some clean guitars come in, and again with those clean guitars, kind of creating a more like moody sort of vibe to it, and Chris Reifert growling his guts out, like, all right, this has some potential, but it has this cool clean melody, but I feel like it just doesn't know what to do with it. Like it keeps trying to transition into a heavy part, but I just feel like it kind of gets lost in the song. Like the transitions are just sort of odd, and I don't know, it feels like the beginning of a really long song that's supposed to transition into something completely different and then come back to this part. It has some cool moments, but I don't know, like there's just like no payoff at the end after that song. Like you just feel like you listen to a rehearsal almost, because again, it just feels stitched together. And while I like a good chunk of this, I do feel like there's a fair amount of filler, like a lot of songs that sort of just repeat the same ideas, and they're good, but you feel like you've already kind of heard that. I think the ones that stood out to me were the most dynamic ones, namely the more Death Doom ones, and Deeper Wounds for kind of going more into like like black metal territory, I guess. But for the most part, the songwriting on here is, again, kind of basic, meat and potatoes. It's not bad, but it could do with just like a little bit of flash. I like meat and potato stuff, and repetition is cool as long as you're repeating something that is really good and maybe kind of building on it. Good chunk of this kind of just repeats the same thing, and while it's not terrible, you're like, well, I feel like they could do a little bit more with it. But overall, I thought this was pretty decent. Like, this was a pretty fun release in terms of like what I was expecting out of it. I think I got maybe a little bit more than I was expecting. I do think it is an improvement over the first one. So I'm gonna give this 3 stars. This is a good album. It's, fun to listen to. It's rowdy. It's got a ton of energy. I think the Death Doom moments on here are fucking exceptional. I mean, you have at least 2 legendary bands associated with Death Doom with this band, so, I mean, they better do it right. I did like the Blackened Touches on Deeper Wounds. I think that's a really good standout track. This was fun, but it did get repetitive at a certain point, and there were a lot of songs in here where, like, man, I feel like they could have done, like, just a little bit more with it. But this is still a good listen. Again, if you like Autopsy, Asphyx, Hail of Bullets, Jungle Rot, I throw them in there too. Like, if you just like meat, potatoes, death metal with a bit of punk and some Death Doom in there for good measure, check this out. It's pretty decent. So if you enjoyed this review, give it a thumbs up, and if you are new to the channel, subscribe, because we do stuff like this all the time. We are also on Patreon. If you'd like to help us out there is a link down below at thrallsmetal.com. Our store is there. We do need to restock on stuff, and we may have an idea as to like what we're doing in the future just to simplify it. But we got to get there first because we have a lot of other stuff we're working on. But yeah, if you'd like to help us out on Patreon, that is the link to do it on. Denver Death Fest. We should have, I believe, our final announcement. I think we're just going to compound all the other bands into one bigger announcement for tomorrow if this goes up on Monday. I think it will. Regardless, the video will show up soon, and this Death Fest, of course, takes place April 20th through the 22nd in Denver, Colorado, because it would be ridiculous to call it Denver Death Fest otherwise. There are still tickets available. There's a link down below. We're looking forward to getting out there and hanging out and seeing some bands, seeing some fans, just hanging out with a bunch of fellow metalheads. How the fuck does that not sound like fun? As much as I detest flying because I'm a giant chicken shit on a plane, I can't wait to be out there, and I hope to see you guys out there as well. And of course, thank you all so much for liking, subscribing, following, all that shit. Means the world to us. I know the thank you part where I get all fucking weird and awkward and you try to step away slowly. I was like, no, man, I gotta hug you. Yeah, we're weird here, but we mean it when we say thank you guys so much for literally everything. It's just amazing to see this channel grow to possibly heights that it shouldn't have reached. Let's be honest. I mean, we're a bunch of doofuses in the basement. What are you guys doing? Like, seriously, you could do so much better, but we're glad you don't, because this is fucking so much fun, and yeah, we can't wait to overload you guys with more content in the future. So, once again, thank you all so much, and we will catch you later.